Hey guys, tonight we're going to step into Victorian London together. Not as a grand historian, not as a mighty queen, but as something far more fragile and ordinary. A young woman waking up in a narrow bed above a brothel. The sheets smell faintly of lavender water, though mostly it's coal dust and last night's candle smoke clinging to the air. Outside, a milk cart rattles over the cobblestones and a baker shouts about fresh loaves that probably went stale yesterday. And you, well, you're pulling the blanket tighter, wondering how you're supposed to survive another day in this city. Honestly, you wouldn't last 5 minutes here without central heating and a proper coffee machine, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love for you to comment below with where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is there now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stretch slowly, your body heavy from restless dreams. The bed creaks in complaint, an old bed that has known far too many tenants, each leaving behind whispers in the wood grain. Beside you, your roommate is still fast asleep, hair tangled on the pillow, breathing deep as though she hasn't a care in the world. You envy her a little, because for now she is somewhere far gentler than this chilly London morning. You slide from the blankets carefully, pressing your bare feet against the icy floorboards. The sting is sharp, and you think to yourself that, if misery had a texture, it would be a Victorian floor in winter in the corner. The basin waits with last night's water, now colder than the grave. You splash it against your face, flinching, but it drags you fully into wakefulness. When you glance into the rippling reflection, you pause. There you are, young, tired, determined in a quiet way. You don't look like the grand ladies painted on tea tins or the heroines of penny novels. You look like someone who knows how to endure. That, in this city, is its own kind of beauty. You reach for the cotton dress draped over the chair. It is plain, faded at the hem, but practical. You tie it at the waist, pull a shawl over your shoulders, and quickly pin your hair. Later, when appearances matter more, you'll fuss with it, but for now, this is enough. You stand at the window, wiping away the condensation with your sleeve. Below, the street hums with early life. A cat slinks across the rooftops like it owns the place, which, in a way, it does. Cats in London have more freedom than most women. You watch the animal vanish into the fog and can't help but smile at its quiet arrogance. The air inside. The house begins to stir with sound. A door bangs downstairs. Footsteps climb. Someone coughs loudly in the hall. There is a rhythm to it, like an orchestra warming up for the day. Each noise is a reminder. This is not just your story. It is the story of a household, of dozens of women who rose from similar beds, walked down the same stairs, and braced themselves for the same uncertain hours ahead. And you, standing there, at the misted glass, let your thoughts drift back. You hadn't planned to be here, no one does, but the seams of your life had slowly come undone. The endless days at the seamstress's bench, fingers raw, eyes aching, the coins never enough to cover rent. Hunger makes choices for you, choices you would never have dared to consider otherwise. A neighbor's whisper, a suggestion passed in confidence, and suddenly the current carried you here, to this narrow bed, in this house of survival. Still, you notice the little comforts. The shawl is warm, even if threadbare. The faint smell of coffee wafts up from the kitchen, and the laughter you hear below, tired though it is, carries a strange kind of camaraderie. This house is not respectable, But it is alive. It shelters, it feeds, it keeps you from freezing alone on a street corner. In that way, it is a sort of family, stitched together from desperation and endurance. As you stand there, you think of the world outside these walls. London in the 1860s is a city of contrasts. Grand marble facades rising just a few streets from crumbling tenements. Wealth measured in diamonds while poverty is measured in bread crusts. History tells us this was the height of the empire, the age of steam and invention, when trains stitched the nation together and gas lamps turned night into day. And yes, that's all true, but what history books rarely mention is how unevenly that light was shared. You might hear of crystal palaces and great exhibitions, but you won't hear about women like you wiping coal dust from their cheeks with yesterday's water. And yet, there are curious details here too, details that make you blink. Did you know that many brothels kept canaries, little yellow birds in cages, not for decoration but to help mask the smell of the house? A songbird's cheerful notes could soften the impression of what happened behind these walls. Strange, isn't it? A life measured in lace and birdsong, as if you could cover reality with a feathered tune. Historians still debate the exact number of houses like this in London. Some say thousands, others insist far fewer. Records are messy, deliberately obscured, because polite society preferred to keep its vices in shadow while condemning them in daylight. And here you are, standing in one such house, breathing in its contradictions. You live in the footnotes of empire, a quiet existence scribbled between the lines of speeches and parades. You pull the shawl tighter and glance once more at your roommate still asleep, still far away. Downstairs, the clink of cups grows louder, the scrape of a chair signals breakfast being set. You take one long, slow breath, filling your lungs with air that tastes of smoke, lavender, and damp stone. You let it out slowly, and with that breath you step forward into your day, into this strange, ordinary, extraordinary life. You move carefully across the room, trying not to wake her. Your roommate is curled under the covers, her face half buried in the pillow, lips parted just slightly as she breathes deep and steady. The bed beneath her sags like a weary soldier, and you wonder how many other women have slept here, whispered their hopes, or stared at the cracked ceiling with the same dull ache you sometimes feel. You pause for a moment, watching her chest rise and fall, almost lulled by the rhythm. It's a kind of shared silence, tender and unspoken, that feels heavier than any conversation you might ever have in daylight. You stretch, your arms reaching up toward the ceiling beams, joints popping faintly. The morning air seeps into your bones, cold enough to make you consider crawling back under the blanket, though you know that's not really an option. Life in this house doesn't wait for anyone. You yawn softly, pulling your shawl tighter around your shoulders, and shuffle toward the basin. The water inside has grown even more frigid overnight, but you splash your face again anyway, the icy sting sharpening your senses. You think, with a smile, that Victorian mornings were the original cold brew therapy, only less tasty and far less Instagrammable. The sounds from the street seep in, a cart rolling by, a dog barking, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves. You tilt your head, listening. London is never truly silent, not even in these early hours. There is always someone sweeping a step, shouting about goods for sale, or coughing their lungs out from coal smoke. The walls here are thin, so thin you can hear the neighbors above you dragging furniture, and someone below humming a tune as they ready for the day. It's oddly comforting, like the city itself is breathing alongside you. You glance back at your roommate. She stirs, sighs, then settles again, her hand dangling over the edge of the bed. She's younger than you, though only by a year or two, but the difference sometimes feels like a lifetime. She still carries the softness of someone who believes life might give her something better, while you've grown accustomed to surviving what life already handed you. You wonder briefly what she's dreaming about. Perhaps she's strolling through Hyde Park in fine clothes. Or maybe she's eating strawberries out of seasoned things that belong more to fantasy than to women like you. The truth is, mornings like these were shared by countless women across Victorian London. The brothels, the lodging houses, the damp cellars all carried the same cold air and thin walls. History books like to talk about the era of progress, of empire, of railways and reform acts. Yet, in the quiet spaces between those headlines were rooms like this one, filled with women adjusting shawls, bracing themselves against another day. That's the history you never read in polished textbooks, though it is just as real, just as human, and there are stranger details, too, ones rarely mentioned. For example, some houses like this installed small bells by the beds, not to summon luxury, but to signal danger. If a man grew violent or refused to pay, a bell pulled discreetly could summon help from the hall. You imagine how often it was used, though no records were kept of such moments. A tiny safety net, as fragile as the women who depended on it. Historians still debate how much protection those systems really offered. Some argue the madams cared enough to intervene, since the women were their livelihood. Others say the bells were symbolic, rarely answered in time, more theatre than safety. And you, standing barefoot on the cold floor, consider that maybe the truth was somewhere in between, like so much of life here, complicated, blurred, neither as grim nor as safe as outsiders wanted to believe. You lean against the wall, arms wrapped around yourself, and listen again to the quiet breathing beside you. That silence is fragile, but it binds you both. You don't speak of it, not aloud, but you both know what waits below. The chores, the customers, the careful dance of survival. For now, though, you let her rest, and you let yourself drift for just another heartbeat in this pause before the day fully claims you. Your stomach growls, reminding you that porridge waits somewhere downstairs. You sigh, amused at the thought that hunger has no sense of drama. It interrupts, at the worst times, unbothered by silence or reflection. You chuckle softly, muffling it behind your hand, and your roommate shifts again. You freeze for a moment, hoping not to wake her, but she only sighs, then pulls the blanket tighter. The boards creak as you step toward the door. Each groan of the wood feels amplified in the stillness, as though the house itself is gossiping about your movements. You pause, hand on the knob, and glance back once more at her peaceful face. This is the last moment of calm you'll get before the day begins in earnest, and you savor it, even as the scent of brewing coffee drifts up from below, pulling you onward. The silence of the morning has done its work, soothing you even as it prepares you. You take a breath, deep and steady, letting it out slow, and with that breath you step into the hallway, ready for what comes next. The hallway greets you with a draft that seems to cut straight through your shawl. You clutch it tighter around your shoulders, shivering a little as you make your way down the creaking boards. The house feels half asleep still, though it's beginning to stir. Voices muffled behind doors, the scrape of a chair downstairs, the occasional burst of laughter from someone who clearly stayed up too late. You move quietly, not eager to be the first one fully awake. But hunger and routine are stubborn companions. Back in your room, you collect the basin, the comb, and a small cloth, balancing them carefully like sacred tools. You set them on the rickety dresser, glance into the warped mirror, and sigh. Mirrors in Victorian London never seem to flatter, but maybe that's the point. You splash more water across your cheeks, gasping at the cold again, muttering a curse under your breath. That's just mild enough not to wake the saints. The sting makes you feel alert, as though each icy drop is a tiny sermon on the reality of survival. Your fingers run through your hair, tugging out the knots from the night. The comb catches, and you wince, thinking how much easier this would be if you could just march into a store and buy the expensive hair oils you sometimes see in shop windows. Instead, you settle for a dab of lavender water, the same diluted concoction everyone here shares. It doesn't smell rich, not really, but it gives the illusion of care. And illusions, you remind yourself, are often all a woman has to work with. In this city, you pull your dress straight, smoothing the fabric down with your palms. The cotton is worn but sturdy, patched at the hem by hands steadier than yours. Some evenings, you'll trade it for silk or satin, borrowed from the houses. Small wardrobe of costumes. But mornings like this demand practicality. The fabric scratches just a little at the collar, and you think about how Victorian clothing always seems designed to make you slightly uncomfortable, as if society wanted to remind you that beauty was supposed to come at a price. You move to lace your boots, fingers fumbling at the stiff leather. Each tug reminds you of the walk ahead, stairs to sweep, dishes to carry, errands to run. The house doesn't run on its own, after all. Every woman here shoulders the invisible labor, the endless rhythm of tidying, polishing, preparing. It isn't glamorous, but it gives shape to the day. And perhaps, you muse, it's no different than women in grander houses across the city, who lace their boots too, only to busy themselves with embroidery instead of sweeping floors. Survival comes in many disguises. As you bend to your boots, your stomach growls again, louder this time, and you chuckle. Breakfast is never far from your thoughts, though the fare is rarely exciting. A bit of porridge, maybe bread if you're lucky, and tea so weak it could nearly pass for tinted water. You think of the grand spreads advertised in the newspapers. Bacon, toast piled high and shake your head. A girl could dream, of course, but dreams don't butter bread. There's a small tin box tucked into the drawer beside the mirror. You pull it open, revealing a few hairpins, a ribbon, and a folded scrap of paper with a verse scribbled on it. You don't even remember where you got the verse, probably from a discarded leaflet handed out on the street. But you keep it, reminder that words can belong to you even when little else does. You smile faintly, tucking the ribbon into your hair, pinning it into place with care. The reflection stares back at you, still tired, but composed enough to face the house. And, speaking of the house, it has its own rhythm, its own choreography. By now, you can hear the footsteps on the stairs, the clatter of plates from the kitchen. You know exactly who is making each sound. There's the heavy tread of the cook, the light patter of one of the younger girls. Familiar, like notes in a melody. Every day repeats itself with tiny variations, and somehow that repetition is what steadies you. Historically, London mornings weren't kind to anyone. Coal smoke choked the air, fog curled through the streets, and water cold, limited, often dirty, was a constant frustration. You'd think a great city at the heart of an empire would have solved something as basic as plumbing, But no. Even Parliament's lavatories flooded from time to time. So here you are, splashing your face from a basin, muttering at the cold. Part of a long line of Londoners learning to make do. There's an odd fact you remember. Many households in this era kept chamber pots painted with political figures inside. Imagine it relieving yourself directly onto the likeness of someone in government. It was a kind of crude satire, and perhaps the only moment of power ordinary people had over those who ruled them. You giggle at the thought, then glance at the mirror again, cheeks flushed, hair pinned, ready enough for the day. Historians still debate whether women in houses like this truly had more autonomy than factory workers or servants. Some argue the freedom of choosing clients and keeping part of the earnings gave them more control. Others point out the dangers, the stigma, the health risks, and say it was no freedom at all. You wonder as you smooth the folds of your dress. Again, if the truth is somewhere in between. Life is rarely as simple as the pages of history make it seem. One last time, you check your reflection. Not flawless, not elegant, but prepared. You gather your shawl tighter, take a steadying breath, and open the door to step into the hallway once again. The day is waiting, and so are you. You pause at the landing, hand resting on the rail, and let your thoughts wander backward, because mornings have a way of stirring old memories. The draft in the hallway doesn't just carry the smell of coal and coffee, it carries the echoes of the path that led you here. You didn't tumble into this house in one dramatic swoop. No, your steps were slower, smaller, stitched together like seams in a well-worn dress. You remember those days, bent over cloth in a dim little workshop, your eyes blurred from the needles, endless pricking, fingers raw from thread, back aching from hunching on a stool too narrow to deserve the name chair. You worked for pennies, really, for coins that slipped away as quickly as they arrived. The overseer would pace behind you, reminding everyone to hurry, though no one ever truly stopped moving. London's seamstresses were practically invisible. Their labour folded into curtains and dresses that made other people look grand. The irony, of course, was that the women who made fine clothes couldn't afford a new ribbon for themselves. Sometimes, after a long day, you would walk home with that hollow ache in your stomach, clutching a crust of bread and pretending it was enough. The streets weren't kind, then either mud splashed up your skirts. Men muttered comments you learned to ignore, and the fog clung so thick you wondered if the city itself wanted to smother you. Still, you trudged on, convincing yourself tomorrow's work would bring tomorrow's relief. But relief didn't come. Rent crept higher, food slipped further out of reach. Hunger is a patient predator. It waits, circles, and finally drives you into corners you once swore you'd never step into. You had a choice, people might say, but really it was less a choice and more like standing on a crumbling ledge with nowhere else to go. There was that evening, the one still clear in your mind. A neighbour, her name drifts at the edge of memory. Perhaps Mary, perhaps Anland, close and whispered of another way. Her words weren't dramatic, not promising riches or romance, just survival. Enough food, a roof that didn't leak, heat in the winter. It didn't sound like sin so much as it sounded like breathing. You resisted, of course. You laughed it off, said you weren't that sort of girl. But the hunger gnawed, the rent man knocked, and eventually the idea didn't seem so absurd. It seemed inevitable. And so you found yourself here in this house, wrapped not in lace or silk at first, but in the relief of being warm, being fed, being sheltered. You traded one kind of labor for another, one kind of judgment for another. The world doesn't stop judging women no matter what they do. It only changes the words it uses. History records Victorian London as a place of invention, of railways and telegraphs, of Queen Victoria herself draped in black mourning. That's true enough. But beneath those layers were women like you, slipping between shadows, living lives not written into the grand speeches. For every steam engine unveiled, there were hundreds of hungry seamstresses bent over fabric. For every glittering ball, there were houses like this one, surviving in the gaps between respectability and ruin. There are curious details, too. Did you know that some seamstresses would work not just with thread, but with candle wax, rubbing it on the thread to keep it from tangling? They would sit for 14 hours straight, candle stubs burning low, eyes straining in the dim light. And yet, for all that labor, they were often still poorer than the women in houses like this. Strange, isn't it, how survival twisted itself into unexpected shapes? Historians still debate whether poverty or morality played the greater role in pushing women toward brothels. Some insist it was always economic, a brutal arithmetic of survival. Others argued that for some, it was rebellion, a rejection of the factory floor or the servant's apron. But as you lean on the railing, feeling the draft slip under your shawl, you know the truth was likely tangled. Hunger made the loudest argument, and morality bent quietly under its weight. You glance back toward your room, where your roommate still sleeps, and realize she has her own path, her own story of how she arrived here. Each girl in this house carries one. Some paths began in countryside fields, others in laundries, others still in places you might never imagine. And though your stories differ, they all converged here under this roof. In this fragile web of survival, the stairs creak as someone else descends, and you step aside, letting them pass. You adjust your shawl again, square your shoulders, and take a deep breath. The past lingers, yes, but the present calls louder. You can't live in memories alone, so you steady yourself, leave those recollections hovering in the drafty hallway, and move forward into the day. The house is fully awake now, humming like a great wooden creature that creaks and sighs with every movement inside it. You step down the stairs, fingers sliding along the smooth rail polished by countless hands before yours. The kitchen door is already open, and the scent of weak porridge drifts toward you. Your stomach growls in response, and you mutter that whoever invented porridge should at least have given it more flavor. Still, hunger makes even the blandest meal seem like a gift. The kitchen is crowded, voices overlapping, bowls clinking against the table. Women perch wherever they can on chairs, benches, even an overturned crate near the fire. The cook ladles porridge into bowls with a speed born of practice, her face unreadable, as though she's decided long ago not to listen to the chatter around her. You squeeze into a spot, careful not to spill, and wrap your hands around the warm bowl. The steam curls upward, fogging your cheeks, and for a moment you almost convince yourself this is comfort. You glance around the room, taking in the faces. Some girls are still half asleep, eyes blinking heavily, hair loose around their shoulders. Others are lively, already laughing, teasing one another, trading whispered jokes. There is a strange solidarity here, a closeness born not of choice but of circumstance. You realize that the house itself isn't just walls and stairs, it's a community stitched together by necessity, with humor as its glue. Breakfast is rarely luxurious, but it has its rituals. Someone always tells a story from the night before, sometimes funny, sometimes weary, sometimes both. This morning, one of the younger girls mimics a customer who fell asleep mid-sentence. Snoring so loudly, he startled himself awake. Laughter ripples around the table. You laugh too, though softly, because it feels good to let sound loosen the tightness in your chest. Still, beneath the laughter is routine. After breakfast, the house turns to chores. Floors need sweeping, linens need washing, lamps need trimming. No one ever tells you this part in the penny novels, the endless, ordinary labor that keeps a place like this alive. You find yourself with a broom in hand, brushing coal dust from corners, watching sunlight catch in the swirls. Dust never really disappears in London. It only shifts from one place to another, like a polite guest that refuses to leave. And as you sweep, you think about how houses like this were scattered across the city, tucked between taverns, shops, and lodging rooms. Officially, most were frowned upon, yet unofficially, they thrived because the demand never waned. Victorian London could moralize all it liked in public, but behind closed doors, the story was different. The house you stand in is one of thousands, each pulsing with its own rhythms of survival, laughter, and whispered deals. There's an odd detail you once overheard. Some brothels kept elaborate ledgers, recording every transaction with almost obsessive neatness, as though order could disguise what society labeled chaos. Quills scratching late into the night, neat. Columns of names, and sums and accountants dream in a place most preferred to pretend didn't exist. You imagine some grey-haired historian stumbling on those books in an archive, blinking at the meticulous math of vice. Historians still debate whether these houses were more dangerous than factories or less. Some argue that here, at least, women shared companionship and a roof, while factories ground them down with endless hours and machines that never cared. Others say danger lurked more heavily in houses like this, hidden in silence and shadow. You sweep, pausing to lean on the broom, and consider that the truth is messy, blurred, impossible to pin neatly into columns like those ledgers. As the chores wind down, the house buzzes with chatter again. A girl sings softly while folding linens, her voice thin but sweet, carrying above the clatter. Another hums along, turning the moment into something like music. You smile, brushing a stray hair from your forehead, and think that maybe this is what survival looks like. Small songs, shared meals, laughter folded into ordinary labor. You carry the broom back to its corner, rub your palms together to shake off the dust, and glance toward the parlor. Already the room is being prepared, lamps polished, curtains adjusted, cushions plumped. The house transforms itself each day, shifting from shabby to welcoming, from survival to performance. You feel it in the air, like a stage being set. Every woman playing her part in the drama of daily life, and you pulling your shawl tighter. Know that this rhythm will continue tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Breakfast, chores, laughter, sweeping dust that will always return. The life of the house may not be glorious, but it is steady. And in a world as uncertain as London, steady might be the closest thing to safety. You lean against the doorway for a moment, letting the broom rest in its corner, and you take in the sight of the women around you. Their voices, their laughter, the way they bustle from one chore to the next, to all reminds you that this house isn't just yours, but theirs too. Each face carries a story, etched in lines, in smiles, in silences. You see them not just as companions, but as mirrors of different lives, all woven together by necessity. There's Clara, folding linens with quick, precise hands. She used to work in a factory, stitching buttons onto jackets for hours on end. She once told you the air inside was so thick with lint that she coughed herself hoarse every night. When she laughs now, it's raspy but strong. And you think maybe the house has given her more voice than the factory ever did. Then there's Margaret, scrubbing the hearth, her shoulders broad from years in the fields before she came to London. She says she used to lift hay bales taller than herself, though you suspect she exaggerates. Still, when she hoists a bucket of water, no one doubts her strength. You catch sight of Ellen, perched on a stool by the window, mending a dress with delicate stitches. She hums as she works, lost in thought, her voice weaving gently into the fabric. Ellen once served in a grand townhouse, waiting on a family that never remembered her name. She said they called her girl no matter how many years she stayed. Here, at least, she has her own name, spoken by friends who know her face. It strikes you how varied your pasts are, how the city has gathered you like mismatched threads. Some of you came from cottages where the nights were too quiet, others from tenements where noise never ceased. Some left behind children with relatives, some left behind husbands, some left behind nothing at all. And yet here you all are, bound together not by blood or choice, but by the simple desire to keep going. London itself seems to feed this gathering, swallowing women from countryside and factory alike, then spitting you out into houses like this. History books may never name you, but the city carries your footsteps in its stones. The great narratives of empire forget that its foundations are built on backs like yours. You smile wryly at the thought somewhere. A gentleman is probably giving a lecture on progress while his boots were polished by a woman who earns less in a week than he spends on cigars. There are odd facts that come to mind, small details historians sometimes mention in the margins. Did you know that many working-class women used goose fat as a kind of moisturizer, rubbing it into their skin to fight the dryness of coal dust and cold air? The thought makes you wrinkle your nose and laugh. But then you consider it perhaps, in a way, it was clever, resourceful, a quiet kind of innovation. When survival is the game, every scrap of knowledge matters. Historians still debate whether these houses created true bonds of sisterhood, or whether the competition for customers kept women divided. Some argue that camaraderie was stronger than rivalry forged in shared hardship. Others believe envy simmered just beneath the surface, flaring when money grew scarce. You glance at the women now, listening to their laughter echo through the hall, and you wonder if maybe both are true. People are too complex for neat categories. There is rivalry, yes, but there is also tenderness, and it shifts from moment to moment like the London fog. As you watch, Margaret flicks water at Clara, who shrieks and retaliates with a towel, both of them laughing like schoolgirls. The cook scolds them half-heartedly, but even she is smiling. Ellen shakes her head, her needle steady, muttering that they'll ruin the linens. You laugh softly, because the scene feels almost ordinary, almost like a family bickering at breakfast. You draw the shawl closer around you, letting yourself soak in the moment. These faces around you are more than strangers passing in a crowded city. They are your companions, your allies in this fragile existence. And though tomorrow may scatter your paths in ways you cannot predict, today, at least, you stand together. The kitchen greets you again, this time brighter, livelier, as if the house itself has shaken off its drowsiness. The long wooden table is cluttered with bowls, spoons, and a loaf of bread already sliced too thin to satisfy anyone properly. Steam rises from the pot of porridge, its smell earthy and plain. curling through the air with a kind of stubborn familiarity. You take your seat among the others, balancing your bowl carefully, and suddenly the whole room feels like a fragile echo of a family meal ordinary. Unremarkable, yet somehow comforting. The chatter is quiet at first, words spoken softly between spoonfuls. Clara teases that the porridge has more lumps than oats, and Margaret replies that lumps give it character. Ellen hums under her breath again, a little tune that seems to settle the table into rhythm. You dip your spoon, the porridge, sticking in slow, reluctant drips, and you think to yourself that no empire should be proud of serving such a meal. And yet, when you taste it, the warmth spreads through you. A reminder that sometimes survival is measured not in luxury, but in having something hot to hold in your stomach. Bread is passed down the table, each woman tearing a piece, careful not to take too much. It's stale at the edges, but softened by a dab of butter when there's enough to go around. You chew slowly, savoring the crunch, even as you wish for sweetness, for jam or honey. Someone jokes that, in another life, you'd all be sitting at silvered tables, choosing between marmalade and fresh cream. The laughter that follows is easy, gentle, unforced, as though pretending for a moment makes it almost real. The cook clatters about, refilling bowls, scolding those who slouch, grumbling about crumbs on the floor. She pretends irritation, but you notice the way her eyes linger on the girls, softer than her words. Perhaps she too feels the illusion of family here, though she'd never admit it aloud. The morning meal has its rituals. Someone always sets aside a bit of bread for the stray cat that visits the back alley. Someone always wipes the table with the same rag, though it seems to spread the crumbs more than clean them. And someone always sneaks a second helping, trying to look innocent while the others laugh at the attempt. These small patterns stitch the days together, making one morning blur gently into the next dot. Historically, breakfast in Victorian households varied wildly. The wealthy dined on eggs, bacon, kippers, toast, and steaming pots of tea. The poor made do with porridge, bread, and sometimes nothing at all. You remind yourself, spoon scraping the bottom of the bowl, that your place at this table may not sparkle, but it's more than some can claim. And that knowledge, oddly, gives you a flicker of gratitude even in the blandness of it all. There's a curious fact. In some parts of London, bakers would soak unsold bread in water and rebake it, passing it off as fresh the next morning. Customers swore they could taste the trick, though hunger often won over suspicion. You imagine biting into one of those loaves, soggy and uneven, and you can't help but smirk, thinking maybe today's crust isn't so bad after all. Historians still debate whether brothel kitchens were truly communal, like this one, or whether meals were more often taken alone in rooms. Some records describe grand shared tables, others insist on secrecy and solitude. But sitting here, shoulder to shoulder with women who share bread and laughter, you find it hard to imagine silence. Perhaps the truth changed from house to house, from year to year, from cook to cook. You watch Margaret butter the last slice with exaggerated care, handing it to Clara as though she were royalty. Clara bows her head in mock dignity, nibbling it delicately until the whole table bursts into laughter. For a brief moment, the walls seem warmer, the air lighter. You lean back, the spoon resting in your empty bowl, and you let yourself breathe. The breakfast is not a feast, not by any means, but in its laughter, in its small rituals, it becomes something more than porridge and bread. It becomes proof that, even here, in this drafty kitchen, you can carve out moments that feel like home. the bowls are stacked, the bread reduced to crumbs, and the laughter in the kitchen begins to fade into the scrape and shuffle of routine. One by one, the women rise from the table, gathering rags, buckets, and brushes, as though some silent conductor has cued the next movement in the day's performance. You join them, your hands already reaching for a broom, the familiar weight fitting easily against your palm. The wooden handle is smooth from years of use, and when you press it against the floorboards, the sound it makes soft, steady, rhythmic, feels almost like a heartbeat. Sweeping isn't glamorous, but it steadies you. The dust curls into little clouds, catching in the thin shaft of morning light from the window. You guide the bristles through it slowly, watching the particles dance like tiny performers in some private ballet. With every stroke, the floor clears, and in that small clarity, you feel a hint of control. For a life where so much is unpredictable, there's something soothing about a task that always has the same result. A swept floor, a space briefly ordered. Margaret is polishing the brass lamps, rubbing with fierce concentration until her reflection shines back at her, distorted but bright. Clara kneels by the hearth, scrubbing away at soot, humming a tune to keep rhythm with the strokes of her brush. Ellen moves through the parlour with a rag, smoothing cushions and straightening curtains with the precision of someone who once worked in grander houses. You catch her murmuring to herself, reciting little verses as though each fold of fabric deserves a blessing. The repetition knits you together. Sweeping, scrubbing, polishing, each action is simple, but when done side by side, they weave a kind of unity. The house begins to transform, shifting from its night self into its day self. The shadows lift, the lamps gleam, the rooms prepare for whatever stories will unfold in them later. Historically, households of all kinds relied on this morning labor. In aristocratic mansions, servants bustled through hallways to polish silver, beat carpets, and air out rooms. In more modest homes, daughters scrubbed and swept before heading to market. And in houses like this, the same rhythm prevailed, though. No historian's gaze lingered long on the women who held brooms and brushes here. The work is invisible because, when done right, it erases its own evidence. There's a curious fact you once overheard from an older woman. Some Victorians believed that sprinkling damp tea leaves across a floor before sweeping kept the dust from rising too much. It sounds odd, but practical, and you picture whole parlours smelling faintly of yesterday's Earl Grey. You laugh quietly, thinking that even dust had etiquette rules in this city. Historians still debate whether brothel work was purely performance at night, or whether the daytime labour, the chores, the duties, was just as vital. Some argue that the polish and order mattered most for appearances, to give customers an illusion of elegance. Others suggest it was simply survival, that a clean, well-kept house meant fewer illnesses, fewer complaints, more reason for the authorities to look the other way. You press the broom along the baseboards and think the truth is likely both. Survival disguised as polish, polish disguising survival. The rhythm of chores is hypnotic. The swish of brooms, the scrape of brushes, the soft creak of furniture being shifted, it all blends into a gentle symphony. You find yourself lost in it, letting the repetition carry you. Time slides by unnoticed, the same way dust gathers unnoticed, until suddenly the parlour shines a little brighter. The kitchen smells a little fresher. The house feels a little lighter. Someone cracks a joke. Margaret holds up her rag and declares she's polishing it more than the lampstand. The room bursts into laughter. Even in chores, there is space for play, for silliness that makes the work pass easier. You grin, shaking your head, broom still in hand, thinking that perhaps routine is tolerable only because of these small absurdities. By the time you finish sweeping, your arms ache faintly, but the floorboards gleam, and the air feels clearer. You lean on the broom handle, wiping your brow, and let out a breath that is half exhaustion, half satisfaction. The chores may never end, but for now they are done, and in their doing, they have given shape to the morning. The morning chores fade into the steady hum of midday, but today carries a different weight. Whispers ripple through the house long before the knock arrives at the front door. The doctor is coming. It happens once a week, as regular as the turning of the calendar. And even though everyone knows what to expect, the air grows tense, like a stage before the curtain rises. You feel it in the way laughter dims, in the way hands fuss with aprons and shawls, in the way footsteps sound just a little sharper on the floorboards. When he steps inside, the house shifts. He is not unkind, nor overly stern, but his presence is heavy, a tall figure in a dark coat, carrying the smell of tobacco and the faint sharpness of disinfectant, which almost makes you gag. He sets down his worn leather bag, the kind that creaks when he opens it, filled with instruments that glint with cold light. You catch yourself staring at the metal, then looking away quickly, as if acknowledging them too long might make them sharper, more real. Each woman takes her turn. One by one, names are called, doors close, silence hangs, then footsteps return. The rhythm is as steady as the chores earlier, but it carries a different kind of weight. Relief and unease, side by side, tugging at every breath. You remind yourself that this ritual is meant to protect you, to guard against the dangers that come hand in hand with your work. And yet, each time, you can't shake the feeling of being inspected like livestock at market dot. You sit on the edge of the bed when your turn comes, shawl pulled tight around your shoulders. The doctor's questions are practical, detached. Any fevers, any pain, any sores. His voice is steady, neither cruel nor warm, just the voice of someone who has asked these questions 100 times before. He peers at you briefly, notes something in a small book, and offers a curt nod before reaching for the next instrument. You answer with soft words, careful to keep your tone polite, though inside your heart thumps like a drum. Historically, Victorian authorities insisted on these examinations in many brothels, convinced that public health required vigilance. Syphilis and other diseases haunted the city, filling hospitals, thinning armies, breaking families. The weekly visits were meant to be shields, though they were also reminders of how fragile those shields could be. And while official records spoke of medicine and order, the women who sat on beds like yours knew it was not so simple. Relief mingled always with shame, protection always with exposure. There's a curious detail you once heard. Some doctors of the time believed that rinsing with vinegar could ward off infections. It sounds laughable now, but then again, so much of medicine did. Bleeding, blistering, purging London was full of cures that cured nothing. You imagine someone bottling vinegar and selling it as miracle protection, and you can't help but chuckle softly, even as the stethoscope presses cold against your chest. Historians still debate whether these examinations truly improved conditions for women or simply gave authorities a sense of control. Some argue the checks caught illnesses early, saving lives. Others suggest they did little but reinforce stigma, branding the women as problems to be managed rather than lives to be cared for. You sit there, back straight, eyes fixed on the peeling paint of the ceiling, and you feel the truth curling somewhere between those arguments. Yes, there is relief when the doctor says nothing is wrong. But there is also unease, the quiet reminder that danger is never far. When your turn ends, you pull your shawl tighter again, rising from the bed with stiff legs. The doctor scribbles another note, closes the leather bag with a heavy snap, and moves on. You step back into the hallway, where the others wait, eyes darting with the same mix of fear and hope. Clara catches your gaze, offering the smallest smile, and you return it. A silent pact passes between you, no matter what you face. This together, by the time the doctor leaves, the house exhales as if it has been holding its breath all morning. Conversations slowly resume, footsteps grow lighter, someone even cracks a joke about vinegar. But the reminder lingers, tucked into the corners of the house like a shadow that refuses to leave. You go back to your duties, the broom waiting in its place, the kettle beginning to whistle, and you tell yourself that for today, at least, you are well. For today, at least, the danger has been kept at bay. The house feels different in the afternoon, softer, quieter, as though it's stretching lazily before the real performance of evening begins. The lamps are polished, the curtains adjusted, the cushions fluffed, yet the air hasn't taken on its nighttime electricity just yet. Instead, there is a hush, a kind of in-between space, where the women linger in parlors and hallways, waiting for the first timid knock at the door. It comes, as it always does, not with fanfare, but with hesitation. A clerk, with ink-stained fingers, hat in hand, shuffling nervously like he's late for church. You watch from the parlor doorway as the madam greets him, her smile both warm and efficient, her hand gesturing toward the room with practiced grace. He sits gingerly, smoothing his jacket as though afraid it might wrinkle, eyes darting to the floor. When you join him, conversation begins slowly, words spilling out in halting fragments. Often, these men aren't chasing thrill but relief. They are shopkeepers, apprentices, clerks, the sort who spend long days bent over ledgers or counters, their voices hoarse from politeness, their backs stiff from endless standing. Here, they want not just company, but a pause from the monotony, a reminder they exist as more than ink and paper. You find yourself nodding gently, asking simple questions, letting the rhythm of small talk soothe him like warm tea. Sometimes, he tells you about his work, about the endless columns of numbers he copies by hand, day after day. You smile, feigning shock at his diligence, and he laughs awkwardly, grateful for the pretense that his life contains more than ledgers. Other times, he simply asks you to sit with him, silence between you both, his shoulders loosening as though presence alone is enough. You think to yourself that, in its way, this house provides a kind of therapy, though no one would dare call it that. Another visitor arrives later, older, his eyes shadowed with loneliness. He speaks of his wife, who passed years ago, of children who seldom write, of a house too quiet for comfort. You listen as he spills his grief in fragments, your hand resting lightly on his, not with passion, but with patience. In these moments, you realize the house offers not just flesh, but ears, not just rooms, but refuge. People come seeking what they cannot name, and sometimes, you suspect, they leave with less shame than they carried in, historically. Records often reduce these afternoons to transactions, tally marks in ledgers, sums of money exchanged, but the lived truth was often softer, stranger. These hours were filled with timid voices, with laughter pressed into corners, with men who wanted only to be seen for a moment in lives that made them invisible. It wasn't always glamorous or tragic, was often simply ordinary, wrapped in quiet conversation and weak sunlight. There's a curious fact you once overheard. Some clerks carried little sachets of lavender in their pockets, convinced the scent calmed nerves and hid the smell of ink. You remember one such man fumbling with his coat, the faint floral scent wafting out, oddly delicate against the dust of the parlour. You chuckled then, and you chuckle now, thinking perhaps lavender was their version of courage. Historians still debate whether afternoons in houses like this truly mattered compared to the bustling nights. Some argue the daytime hours were filler, unremarkable, mere prelude. Others suggest these quieter visits revealed more truth, that here, stripped of drink and noise, the reality of human need was laid bare. Watching a clerk stir his tea with trembling hands, you suspect the second view holds more weight. The evenings may glitter, but the afternoons hum with honesty. By the time the sun dips lower, the parlour has seen a handful of visitors. None linger long, but each leaves a trace, a laugh, a sigh, a half-empty teacup cooling on the tray. You straighten the cushions, fold the shawl back over your shoulders, and glance toward the window where the shadows lengthen. The afternoon has been filled with small stories, fragile and fleeting, but enough to remind you that survival is not just about labor or coins, it is about connection. However temporary. And as the door closes on the last timid clerk, the house inhales deeply, readying itself for the rush to come. Evening approaches, and with it, a very different kind of crowd. The afternoon drifts toward evening. But before the lamps are lit and the parlour fills again, there is a rare errand to run. You slip into the street with a shawl drawn close, the air cool against your cheeks, and for a brief stretch of time you are not a woman of this house, but simply another figure among the crowd. The cobblestones are uneven beneath your boots, the fog curls low, and the smells of London coal smoke, damp earth, horse dung, fresh bread wrap around you in their usual dissonant symphony. For once, you welcome it. You walk briskly, eyes down but ears alert, letting the bustle of the city absorb you. A carriage rattles past, its wheels clattering like loose teeth. Street sellers call out about chestnuts roasting, ribbons bright as autumn leaves, papers with headlines shouting about Parliament. You pause at a stall, fingers brushing over a simple packet of hairpins. They are nothing special, plain metal. But to you, they carry a strange comfort, tools of ordinary women, tokens of blending in. You buy them with a coin that feels heavier leaving your hand than it ever does in the parlour at the next corner. You stop again, this time at a stationer's. The shelves smell of ink and wood, and rows of paper sit stacked neatly, waiting to be filled with words. You ask for a small bundle, thin sheets that crinkle under your fingers. You may not know yet what you'll write on them, perhaps a letter never sent, perhaps a note folded and forgotten, but owning paper feels like a quiet declaration, as though you still have words worth recording. For these moments, no one looks twice at you. You are not judged, not whispered about, not branded by the work you do when the lamps burn low. You are simply a woman buying pins and paper, navigating puddles, dodging hurried clerks. You let the anonymity settle into you like a bomb, the relief of being unremarkable. It is, in its way, a freedom. Historically, London was full of women whose lives straddled invisibility and scrutiny. Servants, seamstresses, governesses, all vanished easily into the crowd unless someone sought to mark them. For women in houses like yours, these errands offered that same vanishing act. The city swallowed you whole, letting you dissolve into its fog. so that for an hour you were not an object of curiosity, but part of the endless ordinary. There's a curious fact. Many Victorian women tucked little coins into the hems of their skirts as emergency money, stitched so carefully it could not fall out. Some said it was for cab fare, some for bread, some for escape if the night turned cruel. You find yourself fingering the edge of your shawl, wondering if perhaps you should sew a coin into it too, just in case. Historians still debate whether these small freedoms mattered in the larger scheme of women's lives. Were they truly moments of independence, or were they simply illusions granted by a city too distracted to notice? Some argue the errands were survival, nothing more. Others suggest they were lifelines, proof that even in confinement, women carved out slivers of choice. As you tuck the hairpins into your pocket and the paper under your arm, you lean toward, believing the second it may be small, but the act of choosing what to buy, of stepping into the street unmarked, carries a weight you can feel in your bones. On your walk back, you pass a row of flower sellers, their buckets brimming with drooping violets and bright yellow primroses. The scent is faint, mixed with smoke, but still it catches at your nose. You almost buy a bunch, almost let yourself carry home a splash of color. But then you think of the porridge in the kitchen, the rent for the room, the coins that vanish faster than they arrive, and you walk on. Still, for a moment the sight of flowers feels like a gift beauty blooming stubbornly in a city of soot. When you return to the house, the lamps are being trimmed, the parlor rearranged, voices rising with anticipation. You tuck away your purchases, smoothing your shawl, and step back into the role you must play. But somewhere inside, hidden like a stitched coin, you carry the memory of your anonymity, and it feels like armor. The house begins to hum again as the last of the daylight thins to grey. The quiet of errands and the stillness of chores melt away, replaced by a sharper rhythm, the rhythm of transformation. Upstairs, doors creak open and shut, fabric rustles, laughter mingles with sighs. You climb the narrow staircase, each step carrying you closer to the part of yourself you keep folded away until nightfall. Your room feels different in this hour, as though it too prepares itself. The mirror catches the flicker of a lamp, throwing back a reflection that is half shadow, half promise. On the bed, a dress of silk lies waiting, its folds gleaming faintly in the low light. The fabric is thinner than you'd like on chilly evenings, but its shimmer is part of the illusion. You lift it, smoothing the creases with careful hands, and for a moment you marvel at how something so delicate can weigh so heavily. The ritual begins. You unpin your hair, letting it fall loose before coaxing it into curls and twists. Fingers tug, pins slide, strands resist, but gradually the style takes shape. Margaret pokes her head in, teasing that you've missed a strand, and you toss a hairpin at her with mock irritation. She laughs, darting away down the hall, leaving you smiling despite yourself. These small interruptions keep the nerves at bay. Next comes scent. A dab of lavender water on your wrists, another behind the ears. Its sweetness clings to the air, chasing away the lingering smell of coal and soap. You close your eyes, breathing it in, imagining for a moment you're not here but somewhere softer, perhaps a garden in bloom, perhaps a quiet cottage. The fantasy fades quickly, but the scent lingers, enough to layer the evening in something gentler. Historically, Victorian women relied on perfumes, not only for allure, but for protection. Strong scents were thought to guard against the miasmas of the city, those invisible vapors blamed for illness. A bottle of lavender water was both ornament and shield, a strange mingling of romance and survival. You dab another drop and think, perhaps, superstition and comfort are closer than anyone admits. Silk against your skin feels almost foreign after the scratch of wool and cotton. The dress slides into place, hugging and hanging in the right ways, shaping you into the figure the night expects. You fasten the clasps, smooth the fabric, check the mirror again. The woman who gazes back isn't the one who swept floors this morning, nor the one who bought hairpins in anonymity this afternoon. She is something else, polished, deliberate, draped in silk and lavender. There's a curious fact you once heard. Some women would mix crushed pearl powder into their face cream, believing it gave a luminous glow. The thought of grinding jewels into paste makes you chuckle softly. You settle, instead, for a bit of powder, to soften the shine of your skin, brushing it lightly across your cheeks. It's no pearl, but it will do. Historians still debate whether this transformation empowered women or imprisoned them further. Was dressing in silk and scent a kind of control, a performance chosen with care, or was it merely another mask demanded by society's hunger? As you pin the final curl in place, you feel the ambiguity keenly. There is power in crafting a self. Yes, but there is also exhaustion in knowing it must be rebuilt every evening, like a stage set that is never allowed to rest. The parlor downstairs glows with freshly lit lamps. Voices drift upward, laughter, a clink of glass, the shifting notes of music on a piano. You slip on your shawl, more ornament than warmth, and stand in the doorway for a moment, letting the sound wash over you. Then you take a deep breath, square your shoulders, and step into the corridor. The transformation is complete. The day self is folded away. The night self walks forward, silk whispering with each step, lavender trailing in your wake. Whatever the evening brings to mid, clerks, boisterous soldiers, lonely widowers, you are ready. The house is fully awake now, the lamps burning with a steady glow, the air charged with a peculiar blend of perfume, smoke, and anticipation. The parlor feels almost theatrical, silk dresses catching the light, polished boots tapping across the floorboards, voices rising and falling like lines from a play. You step into it as though onto a stage, every movement a practiced gesture, every glance another line in the script of the evening. The first visitors arrive in pairs, then in clusters, filling the rooms with a mixture of laughter and awkward shuffling. Some are bold, striding in with the swagger of men who believe they own the city. Others are hesitant, hanging back as though unsure whether to sit, to drink, or to vanish entirely. You learn to read them instantly, the flick of a hand, the tilt of a head, the nervous twitch of fingers against a hat brim. It's a skill as sharp as any blade, though one rarely recognized. You drift from group to group, offering conversation, laughter, and the gentle illusion that each man is the most interesting soul you've ever met. A clerk tells you about his dreadful supervisor. A soldier boasts of far-off battles. A widower sighs over the silence of his home. You nod, you laugh, you console, weaving yourself into their stories until for a fleeting hour they believe you belong to them. Historically, nights like these were often misunderstood in the ledgers and reports. Outsiders wrote of sin and scandal, of temptation and ruin, but they rarely described the softer truth. Much of the work was listening, soothing, creating the fragile illusion of connection. For every tale of raucous debauchery, there were countless quiet nights spent pouring a drink, holding a hand, or humming a tune while someone rested their head against your shoulder. There's an odd fact. you once overheard, some Victorian men carried tiny vials of smelling salts, not just for fainting fits, but to stay alert during long evenings of drink. One gentleman even pulled his out mid-conversation, sniffing sharply before declaring he felt as fresh as the morning dew. You barely contained your laughter then, and recalling it now, you smile again. The rituals of survival are not yours. Alone, historians still debate whether nights in these houses offered women more agency than the days did. Some argue that in the candlelight, dressed in silk, women could negotiate, charm, and even refuse with subtle power. Others insist the glamour was only a mask, hiding exploitation beneath velvet and lace. You suspect the truth, as always, is tangled in between. There are moments you feel in command, steering conversation, choosing when to lean closer, when to draw back. And yet, there are also moments when choice feels like smoke, slipping through your fingers no matter how tightly you grasp it. The hours stretch on, punctuated by laughter, footsteps, and the clink of coins discreetly placed on tables. The parlor grows warmer, the air heavier, the piano slightly out of tune. Still, you carry yourself through it, shoulders squared, smile steady, voice soft but clear. You remind yourself that this is the rhythm of survival, to transform, to perform, to endure near midnight. When the lamps burn low and the voices soften with fatigue, you find a moment of quiet. A guest snores gently in a chair, another fumbles for his coat, and the parlor begins to empty. You slip into the hallway, your feet aching, your head buzzing faintly from the scents and sounds. For a breath, you lean against the wall, silk rustling against plaster, and close your eyes. This, too, is part of the work, the stillness after the clamor. The way the house exhales when the night has nearly run its course. You listen to it, feeling both weary and oddly calm, as though even exhaustion has its rhythm. And then, gathering your shawl tighter, you step back into the parlor, ready to see the evening through until the very last candle fades. The parlor grows quiet in fits and starts, like a fire slowly burning itself down to embers. The last voices trail off, boots scrape against the floor, doors close softly behind men who return to their beds, their shops, their offices, leaving only the faint trace of smoke and perfume in the air. You sit back at the edge of a velvet chair, silk pooling at your ankles, and for the first time since morning you allow yourself to breathe without performance. Midnight has arrived, and with it comes reflection. The lamp at your side flickers, casting your shadow long against the wall, and you study it as though it belongs to someone else. This shadow has swept floors, bought paper and pins, laughed at porridge lumps, and listened to strangers spill their hearts. Now it stretches in silence, neither glamorous nor pitiful, simply there. You wonder if this is the truest version of yourself, the one that appears only when the world quiets enough to notice around you. The other women retreat in different ways. Clara hums a tune softly while brushing out her curls, her reflection in the mirror blurred by fatigue. Margaret sits cross-legged on the floor, still polishing her shoes with unnecessary care, as if perfection will hold the night together. Ellen has already pulled a shawl over her head, dozing against the wall, her breath deep and even. Each of them, like you, carries a private universe that the world will never bother to see. Historically, midnight was a dividing line in London. The respectable world slept. The shadowed world stirred. Policemen patrolled the foggy streets, lamplighters finished their rounds, and taverns clung to their last songs. But inside houses like this, Midnight was neither end nor beginning, it was a pause. A mirror, a space for weary minds to take stock before tomorrow's cycle began. There's a curious fact you once heard. Some Victorians believed it was bad luck to look into a mirror by lamplight at midnight. They feared you might glimpse more than yourself, an omen, a spectre, a future not meant to be seen. You chuckle softly at the thought, sitting here with your own reflection shimmering faintly in glass. If there is an omen in your face, you cannot read it. Perhaps that is a kindness. Historians still debate whether women in your position saw themselves as trapped or as pragmatic survivors. Were these reflections at midnight filled with regret, or with a calm acceptance that life had simply taken? This turn, the truth, you think, shifts night to night, heart to heart. Some evenings feel like cages, others like choices, and most like a muddled in-between. Your thoughts wander to the paper you bought earlier, tucked safely away. Perhaps tomorrow you will write on it, or perhaps it will stay blank, its silence, reflecting your own. You wonder what you would even say. Would it be a letter to a family member you no longer speak to, or a diary entry no one will ever read? For now, it remains untouched, its emptiness a quiet promise that words are still possible. The house creaks softly, settling into its bones as the night deepens. You lean back, stretching tired feet, the silk of your dress whispering against the chair. A sense of melancholy seeps in, but not entirely unwelcome. It reminds you that you are still alive, still thinking, still capable of wonder even in this narrow existence. Midnight is not a glamorous hour here. It is a time of half-empty glasses, aching muscles, and sighs that carry both weariness and relief. Yet in its way, it offers clarity. For a moment, you glimpse the thin line between who you are, who you pretend to be, and who you might have been. And then, as the clock ticks forward, you let the thought dissolve, knowing tomorrow will bring the same rhythm, the same masks, the same fragile comforts. You rise at last, smoothing your dress, and extinguish the lamp with a soft breath. The room sinks into darkness, and your shadow vanishes. Midnight has passed, and so has its mirror. The house lies in near silence now, its walls humming with the faint aftertaste of laughter and footsteps long gone. Upstairs, the women sleep or drift in that twilight state between dreaming and remembering, their breathing syncing with the soft creaks of the building. You linger a little longer, moving slowly through dim hallways, touching the worn wood of banisters polished by countless hands. The night has folded itself neatly, and with it, so has your role. Your silk dress feels heavy now, clinging not with allure but with fatigue. You loosen the clasps, let it slip into a heap, and breathe easier. The lavender scent lingers faintly, faded from the earlier hours, now mingling with the more honest smells of the house soap, ashes, old timber. In this late stillness, you are neither performer nor servant. You are simply yourself, bare and tired, but undeniably alive. Sitting on the edge of your bed, you remember the small rituals that have filled your day, sweeping floors until the bristles sang, laughing at porridge lumps, clutching paper and hairpins in the street, dabbing lavender on your wrists, greeting timid clerks with practiced smiles, and surviving the long rhythm of night. These pieces stitched together into a fabric no historian's ledger can quite capture. Survival, yes, but also connection, humor, even fleeting joy. Historians still debate whether women like you carried dignity in this work, or were denied it entirely. Some argue dignity lives in endurance. Others insist it's stolen by circumstance. As you lean back against the thin pillow, you think the truth lies in the living itself. You exist in laughter, in sorrow, in silence, in the feel of silk against your skin and broom bristles in your hand. No ledger can write that away, and so, as the house finally stills, you let your eyes close, knowing tomorrow will ask the same of you. But tonight, for just this moment, you let yourself rest. And now, dear listener, it's time for us both to let go of the world outside. The lamps are dimmed, the streets of Victorian London have quieted, and here, in the hush of midnight, your thoughts can soften like silk laid gently across a chair. You've walked with me through narrow hallways, heard the creak of wooden stairs, felt the weight of lavender water on the air. And now you deserve the sweetest kind of rest. Let your body sink deeper into where you are. Feel your shoulders grow heavy, your hands unclench, your breath slowing like the fading hum of a distant piano. The world can wait until morning. Tonight belongs to you, to peace, to the gentle rhythm of sleep calling you closer with every breath. Imagine the lamps of the house blown out one by one, tiny flames snuffed into darkness until only the stars above remain. They shimmer faintly, steady and calm, like guardians watching over your dreams. Let their quiet light guide you inward, into landscapes of still rivers, of meadows untouched, of skies that never stormed. And as you drift, remember, you are safe. Here, in this soft cocoon of story and silence, whatever weight you carried into this night can be set down, just for now. Sleep will hold it for you, and in the morning you may choose what to take back up and what to leave behind. So rest, my friend. Close your eyes fully and let the hush of history cradle you. The night is long, but your dreams are gentle, and they are waiting. End of script. Sweet dreams.